Hello, and welcome to the introduction to the Turing Scheme for academic year 2026 to 2027. I'm Martin. I work on the Turing Scheme team at the Department for Education, and today myself and my colleague Becca will take you through this webinar. This video is designed for providers who are new to the Turing Scheme or staff members who are new to the scheme in a provider who has previously applied. And it will get you up to speed with what the Turing Scheme offers education providers and students across the UK and British Overseas Territories. In the first part, we'll cover the essentials, what the Turing Scheme is, who can take part, the core aims of the programme, how the grant cycle works from application through to reporting, and the funding pots you can use. We'll then talk through sector-specific guidance. Whenever you're ready to make an application for Turing Scheme funding, check the full sector guidance on gov.uk and use the application timeline in this video to help plan your internal approvals and evidence collection ahead of submitting your application. We'll also point you to the help desk and let you know about some upcoming Q&A sessions so that you can get answers to any specific queries you might have. By the end of this session, you'll know what funding is available, what good looks like for placements, and what to cover in your application. Let's begin. The Turing Scheme is the UK government's global programme that helps students and recent graduates take up study and work placements around the world. The scheme is open to schools, colleges and universities across the UK and the British Overseas Territories. Turing Scheme funding contributes to real costs like travel and living, with additional support available for students from disadvantaged backgrounds and those with special education needs and disabilities, additional learning needs, and additional support needs. Students don't need to be UK nationals to take part. What matters is that they're studying in an eligible provider here in the UK or in a British Overseas Territory. Applications are assessed independently, and successful providers will deliver placement during the 2026 to 2027 academic year. For the 2026 to 2027 academic year, the Turing Scheme has three aims. These underpin how every Turing Scheme project should be shaped. First, enhancing transferable skills. Placements build communication, teamwork, and problem solving. They deepen intercultural understanding and, where relevant, strengthen subject knowledge, so learners return more confident and ready for the next step. Second, widening opportunity. We prioritise students who might otherwise miss out, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds and those with special educational or additional needs and disabilities. Providers are expected to remove barriers to access, participation and completion so more learners can take part and succeed. Third, driving value for money. Projects must be safe, inclusive and well run, with strong oversight and safeguarding. Destinations should be chosen for student outcomes and partnership value while considering environmental impact. We also expect providers to measure impact, particularly for priority groups, and to use those findings to improve their delivery. In short, Turing Scheme opens the world to learners, building up relevant skills, broadening participation, and using public funds responsibly. Next, we'll look at how the scheme works. From application through to reporting, your journey has 6 steps. First, apply. Check your eligibility, the funding rules, and the assessment criteria. Design placements to deliver the 2026-27 aims of enhancing transferable skills, widening opportunity, and driving value for money. Choose destinations and prepare responses to the assessed questions. You can submit one application per sector in schools, FE or HE, with consortium applications possible for groups of providers in schools and further education. Secondly, checks. After submission, we will confirm your eligibility and financial capability in line with managing public money and the government functional standard for grants. Third, assess. Applications are independently scored against published criteria. In schools and further education, applications are then ranked using a combination of the score and the proportion of learners from a disadvantaged background. In higher education, providers meeting the minimum quality threshold are allocated funding across the sector. 4. Award and onboarding. If your application for funding is successful, you will need to submit a delivery plan and expenditure forecast and sign a grant funding agreement before funds are released. Our funding is a contribution to eligible costs, typically travel, living costs, and organisational support, with additional help for disadvantaged learners and those with SEND, ALN, or ASN, and language learning in further education. Funds cannot duplicate other public funding, must be used within the 2026 to 27 academic year, and cannot be rolled over to later years. Fifth, deliver. You will run safe, inclusive, well-planned placements between the 1st of September 2026 and the 31st of August 2027, following official foreign travel advice on gov.uk. Deliver the intent of your application, especially your planned proportion for learners from a disadvantaged background, and prioritise support for students with SEND, ALN, or ASN as appropriate. Accompanying staff are funded in schools and further education for safeguarding purposes where required. 6, and lastly, reporting. You need to report regularly to the Department for Education on your spend and outcomes, retain evidence, and return any unused or ineligible funds. The Department for Education may request a detailed breakdown of your expenditure and delivery as part of the project. Now we'll look at the three funding streams that the Turing Scheme covers. You should apply to the stream that matches your organisation and your students' eligibility. If you're a school in the UK or a British overseas territory and you're sending your own pupils, apply to the school stream. If you're a school in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, or a British overseas territory with a sixth form that wants to run a mixed trip that includes sixth formers and younger year groups, then you should also apply to the school funding stream. If you have a group that is composed only of sixth form students, those trips must be applied for under further education. In Scotland, schools should use the schools stream for all pupils. Consortia applications are allowed to apply for schools and further education funding with an eligible UK or British Overseas Territory lead. The further education scheme is for further education and training providers such as colleges, sixth form colleges, apprenticeship providers, and special post-16 institutions. And it also covers those sixth form only school trips for schools in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Recognised higher education providers should apply to the higher education stream for students on higher education qualifications, including recent graduates of the same provider. You can make one application per funding stream. In this section on Turing Scheme funding for higher education, we'll cover the essentials for higher education applicants, eligibility, what placements look like, and how funding works. Use this video as a primer, then read the HE guidance on gov.uk for the full rules. Remember, you can only make one application to the higher education funding stream. Recognised higher education providers operating in the UK or a British overseas territory can apply to the higher education stream. Those registered with or recognised by the Office of Students, Student Funding Council, HEFCW, the Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland, or a British Overseas Territory government. You can make one application to the HE funding stream. HE consortia are not permitted. However, A higher education provider may lead a consortium application in the schools or further education streams with eligible partners. You can use external organisations to help administer placements through organisational support funding, but they cannot receive organisational support funding for bid writing. You need to name any external organisations that you're working with in your bid and justify the cost effectiveness. Turing Scheme funding cannot be used towards the activities of Confucius Institutes. Applicants are subject to eligibility, financial capability, and due diligence checks in line with managing public money and HM government grant standards. You can see the guidance on gov.uk for more information. In terms of who can go on higher education placements, students studying a recognised UK higher education qualification or a British Overseas Territory equivalent are eligible up to doctorate level. Recent graduates of the same provider can also take part, provided the placement is completed within 12 months of graduation. They do not need to be selected before graduation. There is no nationality requirements and no maximum age for participants. Students are not eligible if they are located overseas and studying UK or British Overseas Territories qualifications remotely, or if they are permanently studying at a campus outside the UK or a British Overseas Territory. Students with overseas fee status can be funded. Where a student proposes a placement in their country of ordinary residence, providers should justify the outcomes of the placement over alternative destinations. Please note that accompanying staff are not funded in higher education. HE placements are study, work, or volunteering experiences designed to enhance transferable skills and widen opportunity. They should run between the 1st of September 2026 and the 31st of August 2027, from 14 days up to 12 months, and you can count weekends, public holidays, and travel days in that duration. You need to plan your timing carefully. Living cost funding only covers the part of a placement that falls within the academic year window, although travel may be funded if departure needs to happen before the UK term starts. You should choose destinations that follow foreign travel advice on gov.uk, and host organisations should be active in education, training, or the labour market. This can include overseas campuses of your own institution. In your application, you will be required to justify your destination choices by showing how they deliver student outcomes, strengthen partnerships, offer value for money, and minimise environmental impact. After award, we understand that destinations may need to change and the scheme is able to adapt to that, but providers must deliver the intent set out in their application, notably the proportion of students from a disadvantaged background and prioritise students who are SEND, ALN, ASN. The Department for Education may withhold funding and require resubmission if appropriate efforts are not evident. Finally, note again that activities linked to Confucius Institutes are not eligible for Turing Scheme funding. For higher education, there is no fixed per application cap on the amount of funding you can apply for. Providers must submit only one HE application. When allocating funding, the Department for Education considers the overall budget available, application scores, how many providers have met the minimum score for the higher education sector, the number and proportion of students from a disadvantaged background in each application, and how many placements across the sector as a whole can be supported. Higher education funding comes in 5 pots. Travel for students from a disadvantaged background for one return journey, a per day living contribution that varies based on destination and duration of placement, with higher rates available for students from a disadvantaged background, readiness to travel for disadvantaged students. This is paid as actual costs as well. SEND, ALN, ASN support based on actual costs, and organisational support per student. Remember, this is contribution funding. You must evidence spend, avoid double funding, and return any unused funds. The Turing Scheme's travel funding covers one return journey per student from disadvantaged backgrounds, including transfers between the UK or British Overseas Territory and the placement destination. Travel funding is paid at a set rate per destination. Learners may choose any routing, including stopovers. Travel funding is capped at the grant rate for the destination. If the actual cost is below the grant, you may use the difference on eligible travel for other placements, provided your total travel claims do not exceed the granted amount. The Department for Education may request evidence of actual travel costs, so your claims must not exceed the overall grant. Please keep quotes and receipts and return any unused travel funds. If during the delivery of your project you need to change the destination, your funding will be capped at the rate of the destination as applied for and funding assessed. So if you were to move a participant to a country with a higher travel grant rate, your overall travel grant will not increase. However, if you change a placement so that a student is going to a lower travel grant country, your overall travel grant funding will be reduced in order to reflect this. The description below contains link to the gov.uk page with the current destinations and their rates as part of the guidance. We provide a per day contribution to living costs for each student. We do not fund accompanying staff in the higher education sector. For higher education, living costs are paid as a per day contribution that varies by destination group and placement length. For placements between 14 and 56 days, the rates are £19 per day in Group 1 and £17 per day in Group 2. For 57 to 365 days, they are £14 per day and £12 per day, respectively. Students from a disadvantaged background receive higher rates. These are shown on screen. For Group 1 destinations, for a 14 to 56 day placement, they are £23 per day, and Group 2, £21 per day. For a placement with the duration of 57 to 365 days, Group 1 is £18 per day, Group 2 is £16 per day. If a placement runs 57 days or over, the 57 to 365 day rate applies to the whole placement. Living cost support only covers days within the academic year, and in HE, we don't fund staff living costs. Please keep evidence and return any unused funds. For students that have been identified by the higher education provider as having special educational or additional needs or a disability, SEND, ALN in Wales, ASN in Scotland, we can fund necessary additional costs that enable participation. You apply with estimated costs, then claim the actuals with quotes and receipts. Typical items include specific accommodation requirements, extra legroom seating, and pre-placement visits by staff or the pupil to confirm suitability and arrange adjustments. Costs must relate directly to the pupil's need and be essential for the trip. This funding does not cover clothing, luggage, or general goods or assets. If a student receives Disabled Students Allowance, DSA, do not request Turing Send funding for costs already funded by their DSA. You may request Turing Disadvantage funding for costs not covered by DSA, for example, pre-mobility visits. We provide organisational support at a per-student rate to help administer and implement placements. This is £315 per student for the first 100, then £180 per student thereafter. Eligible uses include proportionate staffing, including language preparation and student ambassadors, external delivery partners and programme fees, external audit fees, and room bookings for preparatory or post-placement events. You cannot use organizational support for marketing or promotion, purchasing IT licenses, software or hardware, contingency funding or emergencies, paying an external organization to write your application, accompanying staff, or partner networking visits. Please keep evidence of your spend, report regularly, and return any unused funds. When you apply, name any external organizations you are working with on delivery and explain how your procurement represents value for money. Please note you cannot claim organizational support for placements at overseas campuses of your own organization. And that brings us to the end of the HE section of this video. To recap some of the key points we've just covered, there is a limit of one application per organisation to the higher education stream. Check provider and student eligibility before you apply, design your placements within the academic year window, and note the duration requirements. Follow FCDO travel advice from gov.uk and justify the destinations chosen in your application. Make sure that you understand the 5 funding pots and the compliance requirements. For full rules and how to apply, read the HE guidance on gov.uk. We'll take you through the next steps. Thank you very much for watching this webinar. For moving forward, you have a few simple steps to take. Firstly, I'd recommend reading the full guidance on gov.uk to ensure that you understand all of the eligibility and grant rules. Then you can get further help if needed with specific questions by contacting the Turing Scheme help desk. The link is in the description for this video, or by joining our Q&A webinars, which you can sign up to. These will take place in early February. We'll provide details for signing up to Eventbrite for the webinar that relates to your sector, and that will give you the opportunity to come to us with specific questions during that live event. We'll also place recordings of those available subsequently. After that, you need to prepare your placements and draft your application against the criteria covered in the guidance. When you're ready, you apply online. Applications will open at noon midday on Monday, the 26th of January, and close at 4 p.m. on Monday, the 16th of March. If you are making a Welsh language application or you are a provider in a British overseas territory, there are routes for your application that are offline that are covered in the guidance with all of the necessary details that you have to have there. And we'll end this with saying good luck, and we look forward to receiving your applications. Thank you very much.